how do you work? So the real game here is how do you adjust what we're going to show you here, the thinking we're going to show you here, the concepts to the way you work, the way you think, and your job. I travel with sticky notes, true confessions. They're useful. They're just not a system. So we need to distinguish that. I wrote the Workarounds That Work book, How to Conquer Anything That Gets in Your Way at Work, because in today's environment, people are more overwhelmed than ever before. We've gone through an incredible downturn in the economy, which has lost a lot of jobs. However, we didn't lose a lot of work, just the jobs. That means those left behind have more to do than ever, and they're going to have to work around anything you can imagine to get things done and get them done right. I spent the last 30 years focusing on how do you implement strategy in large organizations. Well, what that means is you have to get down in the trenches. So that means for 30 years I've lived in the trenches, where real people do real work and get real frustrated by systems, processes, and people that get in the way. In order to work around anything, I think the very first workaround is your own mental framework. And I'm fond of saying how you frame the problem is the problem. The more a person says, oh my God, have I got a problem, the more they've got a problem with their own thinking. If you've already got the notion that you framed the problem correctly, so frame it in terms of solution for which you have a contribution, the second thing is stop complaining. So many people spend so much energy complaining and whining about what's wrong. I encourage people to think about what's my role in the solution. What you're working around is a function of how your brain thinks, but you don't know that. Does your desk look like that? Does your mind look like that? Same thing with your email. You open it, you go, ugh, not now. Only problem is you didn't decide what the action was for later. So that means you have to read it again. In which case you do the same thing, you go, ugh, not now. And then you get in this endless loop of opening, closing, opening, closing, opening, closing. That sucks up a lot of time. What makes that a revolutionary concept today is that in 1923 you could make a list of 10 things and get them done. You know what I'm talking about? You can get into the day 9 seconds and you're disrupted already. Because they didn't have email and texting and voicemail and, well, heck, telephones weren't even widely distributed. You just couldn't be interrupted as easily as you can today. By the way, news took forever to travel. Today it goes like this, right? So one disruptive technology, one disruptive economic event, could be a banking thing, it could be in anything. And all of a sudden, boom, all your plans are out the window. Not necessarily doesn't mean they're no longer necessary to be done, it just means they're out the window. So now you have to be able to get your work done, and then you have to be able to work around the distractions and the interruptions, and then get back to it. So that's going to be kind of important. Do any of you deal a lot with urgent fires and crises? Who's got fires and crises? Well, now, do you know anybody who enjoys fires and crises? Not so much. A lot of people complain about fires and crises. What group never complains about fires and crises? The firemen. Why doesn't the fire department complain about fires and crises? Because it's their job, right? Well, now think about it. If you're a firefighter, do you have to do training? How about preventative maintenance on the equipment? Cleaning and organizing? Do you have to do planning, like budgeting, staffing, hiring? How about disciplinary actions? Do you have political concerns? You know, all of that kind of stuff. And oh, by the way, they have to fight a fire the second it shows up. Now, when was the last time you saw a fire engine broken down on the side of the road because they just didn't have time to get it tuned? When was the last time the fire truck showed up and all the hoses were just in there? Doesn't happen that way. Why? Because you can't fight a fire that way. So if you know that that's the way the game works, you organize accordingly. Because, see, in Boston, 90% of all fire calls are false. But the fire department doesn't get to go, they'll call back if it's important. Take a message. You know, they can't do any of that. They have to drop what they're doing. And the reason I'm saying that is that if truly fighting fires and crises is part of your job, you will learn to organize accordingly. so that you can drop what you're doing, get to the fire, and pick right back up again. But you haven't thought it that way because it's not supposed to be that way. Do you ever have fires and crises that the thing erupts into full flame and it's a diddly little thing to begin with? It just got put off and put off and put off till it's too late. Now that's silly. That's what I call the corporate arsonist. Most fire departments do not also employ arsonists. Companies do. We have people who keep ignoring and putting off and ignoring and putting off till it bursts into flames, and then they get to charge in and be the firefighter and put out the flame. So the sad thing is that inbox of yours that has the hundreds to thousands of emails could be the equivalent of rags, oily rags in the closet that will smolder and burst into flame someday. Why? Because it's a small thing. I'll get to it later. So now the worst thing is you could be the firefighter for somebody else's arson, and you might be the arsonist for somebody else's fire. Oops. How you frame the problem is the problem. Stop your whining and control what you can. Managers often don't look into the organization to the people who touch the work, touch the customer, touch the supplier, and ask one simple question. What are we doing that gets in your way? So managers often think they need to provide the control, and they need to provide the structure, and they need to provide the systems, and that's true. But what they really need to do is understand the pain of the people trying to get the work done. When I wrote Workarounds That Work, How to Conquer Anything That Gets in Your Way at Work, I interviewed a number of thought leaders and a number of business leaders. Amongst them was Dave Logan, author of the book Tribal Leadership. Dave said that in his estimation, most business books were bad for you. And he'd said that tongue-in-cheek because he's got several business books. So I asked him why, what's that about? He says, well, most business books are theory. And he said why he was helping me is that this particular book was actual practice.